Here is one of the most difficult questions you can ask in our culture today. Are you ready? Thinking caps on, dictionaries, encyclopedias at the ready. Here's the question. What is a woman? So the Macquarie Dictionary, it's a dictionary of Australian English, although it's generally considered by universities and the legal profession to be the authoritative source on Australian English, but also on New Zealand English as well. And they did a Aussie word of the week just before Christmas, and they shone the spotlight on the quintessential piece of Aussie slang, a word famous the world over, Sheila. A Sheila is a woman. And in use since the 1830s, Sheila has its origin in the generic use of the common Irish girl's name. And as pointed out by former Macquarie chief editor, Sheila has many meanings that range from neutral to viewing women negatively. Sheila is basically a bloke's word. Women on the whole do not use it. Some men seem to think it's a neutral word rather than a derogatory one. And in general, women don't like being called Sheilas. But for example, tourist websites like the Intrepid Guide highlight the Aussie term.
Nicknames, and we give everyone a nickname. So let's start with the name Stephen, Stevo, Barry, Bazza, John, Jono, Darren, Dazza, Terry, Tessa, Sharon, Shazza, Murray, Mother, an Australian, Aussie, a female or a woman, Sheila, and a guy, a bloke. Not only
Oh, there we are. So a Sheila is a woman. But while the Aussies can define Sheila, they're not doing so well at defining a woman. And there's 3 recent examples of government bureaucrats unable to or refusing to define what is a woman. Because if they did, they would upset the radical left, they would destroy gender theory, and they would shoot themselves in the foot with their flawed ideology. So let's have a look at the 3 hilarious examples. Now, number 1, firstly, I've played this one before, but have a listen to this exchange between a Tasmanian senator, Claire Chandler, who asked a really tricky question to representatives from the Office for Women. The Office for Women. The question, what is the definition of woman?
As the Office for Women, what definition of woman do you use?
Tricky.
What definition of women do we use? Could you maybe give us a bit more context?
Of course.
For the question.
You oversee and promote a range of initiatives, funding programs, specifically designated for women. How do you define what a woman is to determine eligibility for the purposes of providing advice on women's policy to government and ministers?
Tricky question.
So, in terms of in the Office for Women, we recognise individuals who identify as women, and that's in accordance with the Australian Government guidelines on the recognition of sex and gender.
Right. On what basis do you use those guidelines to guide that decision, that policy position?
So, Senator, in terms of answering your question, as I say, we follow the Australian Government guidelines on the recognition of sex and gender. So, I guess in terms of looking at our grants program, to take an example. So, we've talked quite a bit today about the expansion of the Women's Leadership and Development program. So, in terms of the grant guidelines, it talks about the fact that those grants are there to assist women's safety, women's economic security, women's leadership, to boost women's workforce participation, to assist to keep women safe, and then in terms of the definition, it then comes back to where I started in answer to your question, in terms of us recognising any individual who identifies as a woman.
So to be clear then, the Office for Women is not focused exclusively on policies for the betterment of biological women.
Senator, I think I can only repeat what I've just said in terms of what we do is following the Australian Government guidelines.
Okay, so I didn't have an answer to that one. Well, then it was the turn of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. So they want equality between the sexes. But what happens when they're asked by a senator from the government, Alex Antic, what is a woman?
The website, it talks about gender equality and intersecting forms of diversity, gender identity and so forth. And the agency therefore clearly acknowledges diverse gender identities. Are you able to provide me with a definition of what a woman is?
So we use the definition that is generally used across all aspects of government that the ABS uses, and as I say, other forms of government. We let the companies. We don't define it ourselves in the Act, and we don't define it in relation to companies filling out the forms. We let the generally acceptable definition that companies choose to use be the basis of how they report to us.
And what's that definition?
So, as I say, it's not defined in our Act, and we let how companies capture that data in relation to men and women, although this year we also captured data on Gender X. It's companies, how they collect that data is how they then report it to us in terms of women, men and Gender X.
So without wanting to be too difficult about this, that doesn't actually give me much clarity about the definition of a woman for purposes of the agency. Does the Act not say that a woman means a member of the female sex, irrespective of age?
So I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but if you're reading from it, then that would be what it says.
So
Sounds correct.
The woman in the terms of the agency, therefore, is a biological woman?
You've quoted the words of the Act to me, and that's the basis. As I say, we don't define it when we ask companies to report on women and men. We let them report it as they collect it.
So, once again, that doesn't really help or assist. I hear what you're saying, but I mean, the Act has a specific statutory definition. A woman means a member of the female sex, irrespective of age. The Oxford Dictionary actually defines female as a person of the sex that can bear offspring, a woman or a girl. Does that not? I mean, it seems like we're having trouble defining exactly what a woman is for the purpose of the...
Well, I don't think, no companies actually ask us to help them defining women and men and how they capture that information. So it's not something that we have had difficulty in terms of reporting along the generally acceptable definitions.
So how can the agency be expected to elevate women in the workplace and reduce inequality when there seems to be confusion about what a woman is?
I don't think there's any confusion, Senator.
I'm just looking for a simple definition of the term woman. There doesn't seem to be one.
I think Senator, you've read out the definition in the Act, and companies have no issue interpreting that in terms of their reporting.
Okay, so that can also include women that were not born women under that definition.
It would depend entirely the basis on which companies collect that data.
Okay, well, I think we've reached an impasse there. I'm more confused than I've ever been, but thank you. I have no further questions.
Join the club. We're all more confused than we were before. But that didn't end there, because next up in the sorry but very amusing saga was the Australian Secretary for the Department of Health. Same senator trying to get a simple answer. What is a woman?
Righto. Well, I'm going to finish up then, because this hasn't been very helpful, with a very simple question for the department, and that is one which has troubled me for a great deal of time with the bureaucracy here. Can someone please provide me with a definition of what a woman is? Department of Health. Definition of a man, definition of a woman. Anyone?
It's pretty basic.
Basic stuff. Professor Murphy.
I think there are a variety of definitions, and I think
Just a simple one.
Perhaps to give a more fulsome answer, we should take that on notice.
You're going to take on notice
Yeah.
the question of what a woman is.
No, well, there are it's a very contested space at the moment, Senator.
It's not just a woman who's born a woman.
But there are definitions in terms of
hilarious.
how people identify themselves. So we're happy to provide our working
That
definition
is
on
one
notice.
of the. I've only been here 2 years. That's the best thing I've seen thus far. Thank you so much.
Oh dear. As I said at the start, if you define a woman biologically, an adult human female, you immediately destroy gender ideology. And because gender theory is not rooted in reality but in ideology, it trips up at the most basic question. What is a woman? Next time you're speaking to someone, ask them to define woman. You'll quickly be able to tell whether they work for the government or media. In fact, 1971, Helen Reddy got it right.
I am strong.